In November of 1971, herself made a trip to Belgium, Austria, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, France, and West Germany. She appealed for justice for the Bengali people and relief for India from the strain of keeping the refugees. She said, "Our country is facing danger. I have come here in search of some wise impulse, which, as history tells us, sometimes works to save humanity from despair."
At 5:45 p.m. on the 3rd of December 1971, Pakistan launched preemptive airstrikes against a number of Indian airfields. The two subcontinental neighbors were now at war. This is the man who took India to war. General Sam Manekshaw, later India's first field marshal, had the ear of the Prime Minister. Never visibly tense, General Sam knew war was around the corner, and when it happened, he was ready.
Mrs. Gandhi was very good about that. She said, "You are in charge, Sam, as long as you get me what I want." And
on the Eastern Front, East Pakistan was surrounded by three major Indian formations: the 2 Corps in West Bengal, the 33 Corps to the northwest. Under the 33 Corps was the 101 Communication Zone headquartered in Guwahati, and the 4 Corps in the Tripura sector. The initial 2 Corps thrusts were meant to liberate territory west of the Padma River, and the attacks convinced the Pakistanis of evacuating Jessore, once thought to be a stronghold. Over on the 33 Corps sector, the main thrust went in Hilli, the goal to cut the railway south of Rangpur before moving south for Bogra. Some of the strongest defenses had been organized in Hilli, which saw some of the most fierce fighting during the war. The 101 Communication Zone area struck from Tura to Jamalpur, northwest of Mymensingh. The 4 Corps offensive in the Sylhet district was meant to liberate all territory in East Bangladesh, south of the Surma and east of the Meghna rivers. 4 Corps attacked in the direction of Sylhet and Maulvi Bazar. The goal in all this was to isolate what was known as the Dhaka Pole. Central to the Indian Army strategy was speed, its biggest achievement remaining one step ahead of the enemy through swift movements and bypassing tactics. Before the Pakistanis could hunker down for a rails fight, the Indian armed forces were knocking at the gates of Dhaka. Despite the initial reverses, the Pakistani military leadership in East Pakistan remained defiant.
But a lot of men might die.
The price of freedom.
For what freedom? Not yours.
It's mine. Yes, my country, Pakistan.
Still consider
Pakistan will stay. Yes.
The Army has some of the finest clubs, hospitals, golf courses and schools in the country. As an Army officer, they're at your disposal from day one. If you're a great outdoors man, there's no place like the Army. You'll be leading a healthy life in a healthy environment.
The Indian Army. Do you have it in you?
In carrying out its lightning offensive, the army had to tackle its biggest challenge, not the guns of the Pakistan Army, but the terrain. Very few proper roads existed, and Indian tanks and armored personnel carriers would need to make riverine crossings through extremely deep and fast-moving rivers. Laying bridges across these wide expanses would be impossible, which is when a remarkable Russian tank came into its own. Criticized in the 1965 war for its light armor, the PT-76 was nonetheless fully amphibious capable of fording rivers, at least on paper. No one, certainly not the designers of the tank, had ever tried anything like this, certainly not in Bangladesh.
The tank is beautiful. I don't think Russians have got such strong currents in their country to try it. But it floated, and we were good 20 minutes to 30 minutes in the water, floating slowly, and went across. I think this is the only time in Bangladesh war when a squadron of tanks ferried approximately 2 companies across. That will mean about 200.
While the army was making remarkable progress on the ground, the Indian Air Force and the Indian Navy also had a key role to play. Criticized in the 1965 war for not coming to the aid of the army for ground strafing runs often enough, the IAF was to decimate the Pakistan Air Force in the Eastern Theater. By the second day of the war, the IAF's Eastern Air Command had neutralized the Pakistan Air Force, and though some of the PAF's dreaded Sabre jets survived the air battles, none of them were to have a significant impact over the scene of battles. Overwhelming air superiority meant that the Indian Army could continue its ground offensive without restrictions on movement and without the use of camouflage. The Navy too pitched in with air operations. Fighter bombers flying off the deck of the Navy's only aircraft carrier INS Vikrant, striking targets in Chittagong, Chalna, Mungla, Barisal and Cox's Bazar. The race for Dhaka had now begun. It was not a question of if, but when. Badly hit by the Indian Army, the tattered remnants of the Pakistan Army were retreating to Dhaka. Their burned down vehicles abandoned, dead bodies littering the countryside. By the 11th of December 1971, the top brass of the army monitoring the progress of the war would have realized that the operations of the Indian Army had been successful. All that was left was taking Dhaka. In Dhaka itself, the tension was palpable. UN aircraft began touching down in the city to ferry out foreign nationals as the Indian Army launched its trump card. A battalion of the Parachute Brigade airdropped in the Tangail area. As the Indian Air Force kept up the momentum in its bombing raids, the puppet government in East Pakistan, governed by Dr. A.M. Malik, capitulated.
I got there after the first raid on the governor's house, which half destroyed the residence. Then I got there just after that. I found the governor in the bunker, in the guard, trembling like a leaf and saying, I didn't quite know whether to resign. Should I resign? Will my wife be killed by the Indian Army? Can I get at the Intercontinental Hotel? As we were standing there in this bunker, suddenly there was another raid. And all hell broke loose. There was an enormous crash. And harder the crash died down, but the governor suddenly produced a ballpoint pen, a scrap of paper, a few carbons, and had written out a resignation statement in a matter of seconds, just in time actually for the second big crash.
Lieutenant General A.A.K. Niazi realized it was all over. As the Indian Army entered Dhaka at 3 p.m., the crowds seemed delirious with joy. Indian soldiers were garlanded as thousands of people thronged to the streets. By then, Major General J.F.R. Jacob, the Chief of Staff of the Army Commander, Lieutenant General J.S. Aurora, had flown in with the draft instrument of surrender. Bangladesh was effectively an independent country. India had won an overwhelming victory.